Okay, Matt, here's the spreadsheet that we're looking at going through here. We're going to use the Alcoa example. Our job name gets input up top. Next is the address. The admin is then going to get the Google link to the job so that it's a hyperlink. The price for the job overall is right here. This section here needs more developed, but essentially they have a job plan that they will make that breaks down the building into sections. That section has basically time estimates, and there's a photo correlated with it. So if we click on textile building here, for instance, the photos that they upload will have writing on it that will box out what the equivalent of a drop is and how many drops should be done in a day, and that will correlate with somehow the production of the job. That's a little confusing here. I don't know that it fits perfect, but here's our budgeted number of man days that we have to do the job. So when they're doing the pictures and they're coming up with how many man days to do the job, essentially that's what they're building the budget off of. And once they put the budget in there, they're going to put in the number of travel days if it's a travel job. So a travel job, yes, no, basically means so that it's going to give a travel budget. And so if it's a travel job, the guys don't get per diem for all 15 days. So if the crew is 4, they skip out on 1 day. So then I put the travel days at basically that less and I didn't do a formula here, but I believe it's just this less the crew size is the number. So let's just change that now, equals this less this. There. This Pittsburgh here should be a drop-down menu that's basically like Pittsburgh, Columbus, Cincinnati, and then we'll put the number of hours that the trip takes or what we pay, because then we flat rate them. We flat rate pay them. I believe this number is correct. And the number of trips, so that's back and forth. This city will need a table for parking, like how much parking is in each city on average. So the crew size gets calculated into the number of vehicles essentially that's going to be there, so that the parking budget gets calculated. So all these purple numbers here are calculated except fuel, which is not purple. And that's going to give them their travel budget on the job. Then when they go to weigh the job after it's done, they'll have how much of each item that they've spent. So that petty cash report that you were building, that'll give their per diem. In that petty cash report, I'd like to be able to get their essentially like their credit card report to break down their lodging and associate the lodging costs against the job so that it's accurate, and it'll populate in the report after the fact. The drive time, that number is manually input, and basically it's like, okay, as long as we sent the right number of people in T-sheets or a workforce, they can have a clock-in category for drive time, which they do now, but it would need to be job specific. It could be pulled essentially from there or just manually input. Parking would be based on either receipts or, it depends on if they paid on credit card. I really don't know how to do that other than manual. Fuel, we're just doing manual. So then this job requires no material. Otherwise, this would add up here. And after it builds the travel budget, everything else I have left over for labor currently, I might not want to do it like that in the future. I might want to be able to specify I might want to be able to reduce this number for labor, and then what would be left over would be considered profit on top of profit, essentially. So if I price a job really heavy, for instance, I might want to peel the labor budget out, because this isn't really the labor budget. Essentially, the labor budget is a portion of this number. So that's not totally accurate. So that's the, if I divide that by 750 a day, essentially that's the labor budget, and the, if I take a percentage of that number. So if I take 9723 times 0.25, I would give a labor budget of this job at $2,400 essentially. But that number is not always 25%. That's really dictated by what do I think I can run the job in. My expected hours then would calculate, it's basically my man days times 8, and that essentially is my labor budget, because when I take my man days times 8 hours times an average employee hourly, so if I take 120 times 25 an hour, that says $3,000. Okay, so I guess I could probably just do it there. Would be okay. My budget price per man hour, labor only. This is just a calculated number which gets rid of my expenses first, and it's just basically my price divided by my man days divided by 8. So no, that's price per man day, labor only. That's labor plus. That's labor plus. Let me do that again. Yeah, that's labor plus expenses. Labor and expense. And this here, this would be the, so I've fucked up my categories, but this one here would be my labor budget divided by the hours performed. This would be real clean without expenses. So this would be, and that would be an actual number versus the expected. So I could do this. If I just copy that, put that there. And then this would be budget price per man hour labor only, which would be equals this divided by the expected man hours. And so if this was there. Okay. So then my expected price per man day is simply these numbers times 8. Okay. A labor and expense, and so this is essentially the reporting area where I'm just trying to get the stuff. And here's my percentage of labor percent after tax. If my travel budget was under over, and then what my net profit of the job itself is. This section here, the team lead would be basically a drop down from, that's the supervisor or team lead, be a drop down table of employees that that Brian would be able to put in here. I have two sections here. One of these was supposed to be planned, and then the other was actual. So basically it's like, all right, you're going to do, these numbers represent a number of drops. So if it's a rope job, maybe they'll do 3 drops a day, 2 drops a day. They're going to put the technician, and the technician is either like super qualified or not that qualified. So they're going to calculate the expectation of that technician and then be able to calculate their averages. And then ideally you want to be able to see if somebody's underperforming here. And if it was planned, like if it's an experienced guy and they're performing a lot less, that would be a problem. Now, the reason they put the expected number of drops is there could be more difficulty on one drop than another. So a difficult drop might be 2 a day, and a non-difficult drop might be 6 a day. So just because one guy's getting 2, again, if that correlates to the expectation, that's okay. The hours against the actual production, I wanted to be able to figure that out, which that would come from T-sheet or workforce rather, of the actual hours per day would pull from there. And then we would be able to take that and measure the job hours directly on the job and measure the hours against the production for the day to look for any red flags of underperformance. The labor rates would be calculated through a tier system that Brian has where he basically gamified the positive and negative behaviors to pay more or pay less. You know, if showing up on time is a positive, showing up late is a negative kind of a thing. He'd have to show you that table. And then this would be able to then calculate my labor, you know, my cost of my labor, basically, which would then get input here and spit out how we did, you know, against the budget. And then this section here would be like, hey, here's how much the suggested price is for next time based on the data that we provided. Now, the only thing I would want here is like some sort of a, you know, like you can't judge your labor based on like your weakest link, so you kind of have to go per average man day. So as long, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but if the job ran well, this is going to tell us if we need to increase the price next year or not. Essentially, it's like, all right, well, in order to make, you know, X amount per man day for labor, 800 a day for a travel job, we'd need to be at 935 a man day. That means based on this data, the price for next year needs to increase by 17%. That's what I've done here. And that's it.